As humanity emerged into a world already layered with memory, conflict, and invisible presence, the middle of this grand narrative unfolds, a time when Adam and his descendants began to cultivate the earth, to name its creatures, to plant civilizations, and yet all the while walking alongside beings older, faster, and often invisible, the Jinn, whose presence threaded through deserts, mountains, forests, and ruins like a hidden current, shaping events, testing humans, whispering temptation and guidance alike. And in these early centuries, the coexistence of humans and Jinn was a delicate balance, a dance of observation, interference, and occasional alliance. For some Jinn recognized the wisdom in submitting to divine decree and allied with humans in both labor and protection, while others, resentful of their lost dominion, sought to manipulate, deceive, or corrupt. And these interactions, subtle yet profound, were encoded into early human culture, mythology, and morality, appearing in the stories of spirits, genies, demons, and guardian beings. And across Mesopotamia, Arabia, Persia, and beyond, humans sensed the presence of these entities not merely as superstition, but as a living reality, an unseen layer of influence that shaped fortunes, fears, and faith. And in these centuries, humanity began to witness the consequences of free will, observing not only their own failures, but the echoes of Jinn history, learning that power without humility leads to collapse, that pride invites rebellion, that moral choice is the axis upon which the fate of worlds turns. And among the Jinn themselves, a vast spectrum of civilizations emerged, some adhering to divine guidance, forming communities of scholars, believers, and sages, while others succumbed to ambition, lust, and cruelty, waging wars invisible to human eyes, yet whose effects, crops failing, storms rising, madness spreading, were felt tangibly. And Iblis, now Shaitan, became the archetype of defiance, moving among humans and Jinn alike, sowing discord, whispering arrogance and temptation, his rebellion a continuation of the ancient fractures that once shattered the world under Jinn rule. And as centuries passed, prophets arose among humans, guiding their communities toward ethical and spiritual frameworks. But the Jinn, ever present, received these revelations as well, and some accepted them, some defied them, creating a parallel spiritual universe where obedience and rebellion, faith and disbelief existed simultaneously. And this layered existence amplified the stakes of human history, because every empire, every city, every conquest took place in a world alive with hidden agents, and the echoes of pre-human dominion never fully faded, shaping human law, ritual, and moral imagination. And in the deserts of Arabia, where the Quran was revealed, the presence of the Jinn was most vivid. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to address communities of Jinn, some listening, some resisting, demonstrating that the unseen world was no allegory, but a reality, integrated into the moral and spiritual order of creation. And even as human civilizations expanded across continents, the Jinn remained, inhabiting ruins, deserts, oceans, and mountains, their interactions with humanity ranging from helpful guidance to deadly deception, shaping fears, inspiring innovation, and teaching through absence and presence alike that the earth was not a human monopoly. And the Middle Ages, for instance, when empires like the Abbasids, Ottomans, and Mughals rose and fell, witnessed countless interactions between humans and Jinn, recorded not always in official history, but in folklore, literature, and theological treatises, where they appear as advisors, saboteurs, or guardians, invisible yet undeniably influential. And through these narratives, the ancient memory of Jinn rule informs the human understanding of justice, power, and moral responsibility, because the Jinn, though displaced from overt dominion, remained capable of shaping outcomes. And history, theology, and folklore converge to remind humans that freedom is a test, power is transient, and obedience defines the righteous. And as exploration, conquest, and cultural expansion carried humans across oceans and continents, the unseen world of the Jinn traveled with them in stories, warnings, and ritual practices, creating a global consciousness of spirits, invisible entities, and moral tests embedded in the natural and supernatural worlds. And in this period, human awareness of the unseen began to solidify into codified ethics. Prayers, protective rituals, and cultural norms evolved to safeguard humans from Jinn interference, while simultaneously recognizing that some Jinn were benevolent, capable of belief, guidance, and protection. And Islamic scholarship deepened the understanding of Jinn psychology, society, and law, noting that they marry, reproduce, govern themselves, and are subject to judgment like humans, yet their physical and metaphysical capacities far exceed human perception, able to traverse realms, assume forms, and influence events imperceptibly. And this duality of coexistence and conflict, of visibility and invisibility, mirrors the ongoing struggle within human society, where temptation, ambition, loyalty, and morality define the trajectory of communities. And as history progressed into the Renaissance and modern periods, human understanding of natural laws, science, and observation grew, yet belief in Jinn persisted, often reinterpreted but never extinguished, shaping anthropology, psychology, literature, and religious consciousness. And in this continuum, one observes that the Earth, though seemingly dominated by humans, remains layered with the legacy of the older race, the Jinn, whose ancient societies, wars, kings, and civilizations left an imprint not only on landscapes and ruins, but on human moral imagination, demonstrating that rulership is a matter of responsibility, obedience, and justice, not mere possession. And throughout this middle epoch, the struggle between Iblis and humanity continued as both direct influence and symbolic archetype, reminding humankind that rebellion against divine law carries consequences not only for the individual, but for society, that history repeats when lessons are ignored, and the unseen is as influential as the seen. And as human empires advanced, as civilizations grew, crumbled, and were replaced, the Jinn observed, adapted, and intervened selectively, creating narratives of morality, fear, and inspiration that would resonate across centuries, becoming embedded in religious texts, legal codes, and cultural lore. And even in contemporary consciousness, these echoes survive in stories, superstitions, and spiritual practices, serving as reminders of a pre-human dominion and the enduring presence of another intelligent species whose origins, choices, and legacies predate mankind. And in this dense, layered middle period, humanity learns not only to navigate physical landscapes, but to negotiate moral and unseen realms, understanding through experience that power is a test, that freedom without conscience leads to corruption, and coexistence with forces older, stronger, and invisible requires vigilance, humility, and ethical awareness. And through these centuries, the Earth becomes a theater of dual histories, one visible, chronicled in stone, city, and manuscript, the other invisible, carried in memory, folklore, and revelation. And together they form the continuum from pre-human Jinn dominion to human moral and civilizational development, where every empire, every conquest, every law carries the weight of unseen witnesses, and every ethical choice echoes across both realms, reminding humankind that the Earth, though now their stewardship, remains intertwined with beings older than time, whose presence, power, and judgment endure until the final reckoning. And it is within this rich, complex middle epoch that the lessons of obedience, pride, power, and responsibility crystallize, preparing the stage for the ultimate conclusion of the narrative, when both humans and Jinn will be measured against the scales of justice, and the Earth, once the domain of fire, blood, and rebellion, will witness the fulfillment of divine decree, the culmination of morality,
and the final reckoning that defines the ultimate legacy of rulership, choice, and accountability, setting the path toward the end.
Before the first human ever drew breath in the vast, untamed expanses of the earth, before bone and flesh learned to walk upright and voice learned to call upon the heavens, the world existed as a living, trembling entity, raw and unshaped, where mountains pressed against clouds that had not yet learned to rain, rivers carved their courses in silence, and seas stretched like molten mirrors reflecting a sun still young in its blaze. And in this ancient epic, far beyond the reach of human memory, and long before Adam was fashioned from clay, the earth was already inhabited by a race older, faster, and far more enigmatic than humanity could ever imagine. The Jinn, beings created from a smokeless flame, a subtle fire that burned not with smoke or ash, but with pure energy, speed, and volatility. And in their creation there was a deliberate order, for unlike humans who would later walk the earth in fragility, the Jinn were endowed with intellect, free will, and the extraordinary capacity to shape the world around them, to move unseen, to traverse vast distances instantly, to shift form at will, and to build societies hidden from human eyes, yet fully alive with the same ambitions, loyalties, rivalries, and passions that would later define human empires. And from the earliest moments of their existence, the Jinn scattered across the earth, inhabiting mountains that pierced the sky, forests that had not yet learned their seasons, deserts that stretched into infinity, and the ruins of primordial landscapes, forming tribes and kingdoms, scholars and warriors, kings and tyrants, some of whom obeyed the divine command to worship their creator with devotion, while others grew arrogant, violent, and insatiable. And in those earliest centuries, centuries measured not in decades or centuries, but in epochs beyond human reckoning, the earth under Jinn dominion became a place of power and peril, because freedom without restraint invites chaos, and pride untempered by wisdom breeds destruction. And thus the Jinn, in their strength and brilliance, began to wage wars, not merely against one another, but against the very harmony of creation, spilling blood across lands that humans would only later come to name, corrupting regions with violence and dominance, and the air itself, still pure and young, seemed to vibrate with their unrest, for they were beings of fire, and fire seeks fuel, and the earth itself, though resilient, began to bear the scars of their civil strife, scars that would echo across the ages. And as their power grew, so too did their disobedience, until the world itself teetered on the brink of devastation. And it is here, in this maelstrom of rebellion and might, that divine intervention becomes necessary, because the laws of existence demand balance, and when one creation exceeds its mandate, the Creator intervenes, not in vengeance alone, but in justice. And so the angels were sent forth to restore order, and among them rose Iblis, a being of profound knowledge and piety, a Jinn elevated above his peers due to his devotion, whose intellect and zeal had granted him a place among angels themselves. And Iblis became the commander against the rebellious Jinn, leading campaigns that drove factions into the remotest corners of the earth, isolating them in deserts, islands, mountains, and ruins. And through these actions, order was temporarily restored, and for a moment the earth exhaled in relief, calm and cleansed. And yet even in this seeming victory, history itself was shaping the stage for a transformation far greater than the displacement of a single race, because the divine plan had already envisioned a new creation, one who would inherit the earth not by fire, but by spirit, molded from clay and imbued with a soul unlike any other. And the angels, witnessing the tumultuous history of the Jinn, questioned the wisdom of placing another free-willed being upon a world that had already known corruption, asking why such a creation would risk repeating the cycle of rebellion. And Allah's response, "I know what you do not know," resonated through eternity, affirming that human destiny would unfold in ways beyond angelic foresight. And so Adam was shaped, his clay form brought to life, taught the names of all things, honored above angels, and positioned as the new Khalifa, the successor, the steward of the earth. And with this act, the era of Jinn dominion entered its twilight, not through destruction, but through the necessity of succession. And when the command came for all to bow before Adam, recognizing the new order, Iblis refused, declaring his fiery origin superior to clay, his pride igniting the first fissure between obedience and rebellion that would define cosmic history. And in that refusal, he fell, becoming Shaitan, the adversary, the eternal symbol of defiance, whose wrath would shadow humanity from its first breath. And the middle of the story begins here, with humanity emerging into a world already shaped, scarred, and inhabited, coexisting with Jinn who retreated into invisibility, not extinct, not vanquished, but hidden, carrying with them the memory of empires, of wars, of kings, and of laws that predated human civilization. And the earth became a layered realm, a stage where visible and invisible beings interacted, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently, influencing human thought, inspiration, fear, madness, and devotion. And as humans built their own kingdoms, Sumer, Akkad, Egypt, Persia, Rome, the ruins of past Jinn civilizations became the silent witnesses to this history, whispered about in folklore, inscribed in desert legends, remembered in religious tradition. For the Jinn did not vanish, they remained, listening, observing, believing, disbelieving, and shaping the moral universe in ways human senses could rarely perceive. And Islamic scripture confirms that some Jinn accepted revelation, forming communities of believers, acknowledging prophets, obeying divine command, while others persisted in rebellion, mischief, and corruption. And this duality mirrors the moral spectrum humans would later inhabit, making the earth a realm of constant choice, of test, and of consequence. And the long-term impact of these narratives extends beyond theology, affecting culture, architecture, protective rituals, desert taboos, and human behavior toward the unseen, because belief in the Jinn, rooted in the memory of their ancient rule, teaches that the world is never empty, never solitary, and never entirely under human control. And even as empires rise and fall, as humans conquer and destroy, the Jinn remain, unseen custodians of history, witnesses to the repetition of arrogance and violence. And as time stretches toward the end, when creation itself will be judged, the story of the Jinn before humans serves not merely as a tale of pre-human dominion, but as a mirror reflecting the consequences of unchecked power, the danger of pride, the importance of obedience, and the inevitability of divine justice. And when the final trumpet sounds, when the earth surrenders all its secrets, and when both human and Jinn faces are measured against the scales of righteousness, the question of who ruled first will pale before the question of who ruled justly. For the Jinn ruled not because of destiny, but because of freedom, and it was the use or misuse of that freedom that marked their history, a history that humanity inherits in part, not as rulers, but as successors. And so the beginning of this ancient saga closes, setting the stage for a world shared, contested, and morally charged, where humans walk among the shadows of those who came before, and where every step of mankind echoes the choices, triumphs, and failures of the primordial beings who once held the earth in their fiery grasp.
As the world moved toward the final chapter of this vast saga, the end begins not with the rise of empires or the clash of armies, but with the convergence of moral and cosmic destiny. For every choice made by humans and Jinn alike has been recorded, observed, and weighed in the unseen realms, and the earth, layered with the histories of both species, now bears the accumulated consequences of obedience, rebellion, ambition, and humility, a complex ledger of moral cause and effect stretching back to the first moments of creation, when fire gave rise to the jinn and clay to humans. And in this era, humanity, now fully established across continents, cities, and civilizations, comes to realize that dominion over the earth is not merely a matter of power, technology, or population, but of responsibility, restraint, and justice. And the jinn, ever present, continue their role as both test and witness, some guiding humanity toward faith and ethical action, some enticing toward corruption and disobedience. And the shadow of Iblis looms over all, a reminder of the catastrophic consequences of pride, rebellion, and the misuse of freedom, whose influence, subtle yet pervasive, seeks to unsettle the hearts of men and the minds of jinn alike. Yet within this tension lies the profound purpose of creation, to provide both human and jinn with the opportunity to choose rightly, to exercise free will within the moral framework set by the Creator. And history, viewed through this lens, becomes more than a record of events. It becomes a testament to the enduring struggle between obedience and rebellion, the visible and invisible, the temporal and eternal. And as the modern age unfolds, humanity's empirical knowledge grows, cities expand, technologies advance, and yet the unseen continues to exist alongside the seen. For the jinn are not bound by human perception, and their presence is embedded in rituals, prayers, and cultural narratives, serving as both safeguard and cautionary tale, reminding humans that they inherit not only the earth, but the moral and spiritual consequences of those who came before. And when the final era approaches, eschatological teachings depict a world in which the judgment of both species is imminent, where the earth itself will be dissolved and recreated, and the ultimate scales of justice will weigh every act, every thought, every choice made by both human and jinn. For the purpose of creation is not dominion alone, but the exercise of free will aligned with divine command. And in this final reckoning, the ancient jinn who once ruled openly, the displaced and hidden civilizations of fire, will be measured alongside humanity, their legacies, their obedience, and their rebellion assessed, and the narrative comes full circle, revealing that pre-human dominion was never an end in itself, but a lesson, a prelude to the stewardship entrusted to humans, whose trials mirror in miniature the great struggles of the jinn. And as the cosmic order unfolds, it becomes clear that power without responsibility, freedom without conscience, and knowledge without humility inevitably leads to downfall. And the ultimate reward, whether for human or jinn, is determined not by origin, by strength, or by visibility, but by alignment with the moral and spiritual law that governs all creation. And thus, the earth, once the battlefield of fire, spirit, and ambition, is restored as a stage for ethical choice, spiritual cultivation, and moral reckoning, a place where the echoes of jinn civilization, the victories and failures of ancient fire, and the enduring struggles of humanity intersect to produce a narrative of profound meaning. And in the quiet that follows, when the final judgment has been rendered, when the trumpets have sounded and the veil between worlds is lifted, the history of the jinn before Adam stands not merely as a story of forgotten rulers, but as a cosmic prologue, a moral mirror, and an enduring lesson for mankind, reminding that the stewardship of the earth, the exercise of free will, and the pursuit of righteousness are the ultimate tests, and that the legacy of those who ruled before humans, of beings of fire and rebellion, continues to shape the moral and spiritual fabric of the world, weaving together the destinies of all creation into a tapestry where obedience, humility, justice, and ethical choice determine the true measure of dominion. And in this final vision, one realizes that history is not simply a chronology of events, but a living, breathing continuum of moral consequence, that the earth is never truly empty, and that every human step, every act of conscience or defiance resonates across both visible and invisible realms, echoing the ancient story of the jinn, the first rulers of the earth, whose presence, trials, triumphs, and failures have forever defined the framework of human existence, leaving a legacy that transcends time, space, and perception, culminating in a profound realization that rulership, whether by fire or clay, is fleeting unless grounded in justice, obedience, and wisdom, and that the story of the Jinn before humans, of their kingdoms, wars, civilizations, and ultimate displacement, endures as a warning, a lesson, and a guide. For humanity is now the inheritor of the earth, entrusted not with dominion alone, but with moral accountability, tasked with choosing rightly amidst temptation, testing, and unseen influence. And as this narrative closes, it leaves an indelible truth carved into the fabric of existence, that the earth has always been more than human, that the unseen world has always influenced the seen, and that the measure of true rule lies not in possession or power, but in righteousness, responsibility, and the unyielding pursuit of obedience to the divine law. And in this final vision, one realizes that history is not simply a chronology of events, but a living, breathing continuum of moral consequence, that the earth is never truly empty, and that every human step, every act of conscience or defiance resonates across both visible and invisible realms, echoing the ancient story of the Jinn, the first rulers of the earth, whose presence, trials, triumphs, and failures have forever defined the framework of human existence, leaving a legacy that transcends time, space, and perception, culminating in a profound realization that rulership, whether by fire or clay, is fleeting unless grounded in justice, obedience, and wisdom, and that the story of the Jinn before humans, of their kingdoms, wars, civilizations, and ultimate displacement, endures as a warning, a lesson, and a guide. For humanity is now the inheritor of the earth, entrusted not with dominion alone, but with moral accountability, tasked with choosing rightly amidst temptation, testing, and unseen influence. And as this narrative closes, it leaves an indelible truth carved into the fabric of existence, that the earth has always been more than human, that the unseen world has always influenced the seen, and that the measure of true rule lies not in possession or power, but in righteousness, responsibility, and the unyielding pursuit of obedience to the divine law. And in this final vision, one realizes that history is not simply a chronology of events, but a living, breathing continuum of moral consequence, that the earth is never truly empty, and that every human step, every act of conscience or defiance resonates across both visible and invisible realms, echoing the ancient story of the Jinn, the first rulers of the earth, whose presence, trials, triumphs, and failures have forever defined the framework of human existence, leaving a legacy that transcends time, space, and perception, culminating in a profound realization that rulership, whether by fire or clay, is fleeting unless grounded in justice, obedience, and wisdom, and that the story of the Jinn before humans, of their kingdoms, wars, civilizations, and ultimate displacement, endures as a warning, a lesson, and a guide. For humanity is now the inheritor of the earth, entrusted not with dominion alone, but with moral accountability, tasked with choosing rightly amidst temptation, testing, and unseen influence. And as this narrative closes, it leaves an indelible truth carved into the fabric of existence, that the earth has always been more than human, that the unseen world has always influenced the seen, and that the measure of true rule lies not in possession or power, but in righteousness, responsibility, and the unyielding pursuit of obedience to the divine law. And in this final vision, one realizes that history is not simply a chronology of events, but a living, breathing continuum of moral consequence, that the earth is never truly empty, and that every human step, every act of conscience or defiance resonates across both visible and invisible realms, echoing the ancient story of the Jinn, the first rulers of the earth, whose presence, trials, triumphs and failures have forever defined the framework of human existence, leaving a legacy that transcends time, space, and perception, culminating in a profound realization that rulership, whether by fire or clay, is fleeting unless grounded in justice, obedience, and wisdom, and that the story of the Jinn before humans, of their kingdoms, wars, civilizations, and ultimate displacement, endures as a warning,